I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition.
A few weeks ago, I was talking to one of our clients who was reporting that he had just come off of a couple-week bout with the flu. Another one a year or two ago said that they had just experienced a minor heart attack. And in all those conversations, as they started to unpack the illness or the injury that they had, we came upon this topic of stress. And it wasn't that hard to relate back to that person that stress was probably upstream of the injury. Stress was upstream of the disease. And if we believe in that, then the chicken or egg theory is stress is the source of these ailments, these injuries. And so we have to be able to address what causes the stress that then creates the downstream effect of the injury or the burnout or the disease. My next guest on the Business of Intuition is really an expert in the science around identifying what causes a person's unique level of stress and their tolerance, and how best to create a better balanced life through gut health, through mental health, through physical health. And the combination of those three is really something that we all should be aware of, so that we don't get into that one, the behavior of burnout, that is simply the habit, and the addiction of burnout, which is those chemicals in our brain that keep us doing the same thing over and over again, even though mentally we may realize it's the wrong thing. Olly Wood is the owner of The Body Reset, a premium health coaching service focused on helping business owners and entrepreneurs elevate their energy, body, and mind. They have coached thousands of clients through a unique framework to fix their gut, rebuild their energy, and feel confident in their own skin over 40. Olly Wood on the Business of Intuition. Well, Olly, it is great to have you on the show all the way from New Zealand, correct?
Yeah.
Yep, it's a day ahead. And I would love to start us off with a popular topic, but to get your take on it. I know a lot of us can say that we are suffering from some level of burnout. It seems to be, the ailment of the 21st century. Maybe it was for the 20th century as well. But what is it that's going on in our lives that causes us to start feeling burned out? I mean, if you were to track it back to behavior, attitude, what causes burnout?
Yeah. I came from a big background in athletics and sports overall, and it became very easy to focus on a goal because you had a goal, you had a time frame, and you had a general time that you were working out, and then the time that you had to recover. I think the trouble that we run into as a busy professional or business owners is that there's a constant, there's no deadline, there's no rules, and there's no finish. Right? Mm-hmm. So that we live in this always on culture, and we live in a space where there's always something to be done, that if we're burning the candles from both ends, it's quite easy to really hit that point. And I think stress is something that, we dive into a ton, because it's not, I think in the health space, we tend to look at this as something that is, constantly something we're battling to reduce, but very much like toxicity, stress and toxicity are things we're not going to remove. We can simply reduce their exposure, but we can certainly improve our tolerance as well. So what I mean by that is stress is definitely coming through as being a chronic problem, right? Stress in short bouts through exercise or getting something done is not the problem. It's when it becomes chronic, it becomes all day, that this low-level stress really starts to get on top of us. So I think there's two key parts that we can look at there. Is one, addressing stress, both physical and psychological, that are coming through. Yes, we're stressing out all day and looking at certain ways of pattern interrupting that with a pause or a breath or a meditation or some version there, I think is really helpful. But in a very real way, realizing that, a lack of sleep, poor quality foods, poor gut health are all going to increase stress on the body in a very real and physical way. Ways that we can improve our tolerance to the outside world. that ties in, I think, to the second one, which is so much more relevant for business owners and busy professionals, is that space of realizing that stress is not a level, but a threshold. And that means it can be trained. That means it can be lowered if you're not looking after yourself, and that's something that can be raised if you train it. And I think looking at health as being an asset to your business, being an asset to your work, comes through that lens of really looking at that as a threshold that can be toggled up or down. So hopefully a lot of things we talk about will be through the lens of nutrition or movement or whatever that might be, but it's through the lens of how we can show up as a more productive, more effective leader or human that allows you to get the most out of your day, because you're actually able to choose, to give you an example, you're able to choose some level of challenge in your morning. It might be a workout, a quick run, a cold shower, where you're actually exposing your body to a high level of stress in the morning, which in comparison allows the discrepancy between the low level stress that you experience day to day that's probably getting on top of you versus the challenge that you're experiencing in your day. When we create that gap, we create some distance between the two, we're able to feel like we can tackle a lot more in our day. I think burnout really comes not from a level of stuff we need to do, but when that stuff is getting on top of us and it's tackling us instead of us tackling the day.
You said so much, and I was taking notes. It's hard to know where to start from everything you just downloaded there, but you mentioned this cold shower idea that I wanted to start with here, where are you then saying in it that we could create a stressful situation, maybe it's physical or what have you, that in a sense sets the tone for our threshold of stress throughout the day? Meaning,
that's exactly it.
Example, I'm going to take a really cold shower and I scream myself into my first cup of coffee, but at least now that sort of sets a tone that every other piece of stress almost seems like, oh, this is nothing because I've already had my cold shower. I mean, maybe it's a bad analogy, but is that in a sense, can we train or stretch our ability to accept stress by starting off with something stressful?
Yeah, exactly. And this is something I've trained with, thousands of clients at this point. And it came out of one very simple study where they had these mice that they exposed to low level stress, right? To the point that they were showing through depressive symptoms or just signs that they were, kind of getting to that level of burnout. They were just not tolerating stress particularly well. Now, rather than putting that mouse on the typical mouse holiday, right, to get them to feel better, what they did is expose them to high level stress for 5 minutes a day, or higher level stress. And what that did is actually reverse the symptoms of depression and these things coming through, because they were seeing, that short bout of high level stress actually allowed that discrepancy to create a tolerance and higher threshold to stress in the day. So 100%.
That's understanding. So I had a guy on the show, which hasn't gone live yet, but it will hear it shortly, a gentleman named Paul J. Zach, and a neuroscientist and fascinating individual. But his point was that the brain, among other things, gets tired after 20 minutes. And his advice to people like myself who do a lot of facilitations is let people reset their brain after 20 minutes. Almost like that's our threshold. By and large, not everybody is going to be exactly 20 minutes, some more, some less. But it sounds like in a way, what you're doing is trying to teach people in many ways, other things as well, is to be able to expand that threshold, that resilience to stress, and being able to start the day off. So in a way, I guess this is an odd question, Olly, but what is stress? I mean, it sounds like there is some good stress, meaning like I'm going to go out for a run and the endorphins and all the stuff that comes with it, the stress on my body actually makes me healthier. What's the difference between bad stress and good stress? And I guess I want to get down to the DNA of what we're really talking about.
Yeah. I think someone gave me a quote the other day. I believe it was by Jeff Bezos, actually, back when he had hair, so a little while ago. And it was in a space where he said stress was the response to things that you can control that you're not doing anything about, which I thought was really interesting, right? There's all of it's in the space. If it's something we can't control, then it's worry. If it's something we can control, but we're not doing the thing, it's stress. I thought that was an interesting term on it. But looking at it through the lens of what's good stress and what's bad stress, I think at the end of the day, that association itself kind of creates it, right? Because if I jump out of an airplane doing skydive, one person finds that exhilarating and exciting and enjoyable. The next person is freaking out, right? The difference there is not in the activity, it's in our tolerance or response to that stress. Now, the reason I bring that association up is, Dean, imagine you 5 years ago running your company, running all the things you did. Imagine if you threw that onto yourself 5 years ago or 10 years ago when you were really fresh in this space. that stress would have crushed you. I know it certainly would have for me, right? The amount of things I do in the day, the amount of chatter and thoughts and to-do lists and meetings and all the things that are going through my head now is a threshold that I've built up over time. So I think looking at stress as, a level, as a threshold, not a level, or a set level, is a really important way to look at stress in the same way you look at it as a muscle. If you don't train a muscle, you don't have any level of tolerance to lifting weights. If you lift it once, you get really sore and you have to recover. Yet if you're building this up over time, and certainly with a lot of business owners we're working with, if you've got a team of 5 people, 10 people, 100 people, there's a huge amount of stress that's built out over time. If you gave Olly 200 employees tomorrow without ever running a company, I would break very quickly, right? So I think it's really understanding there's no good or bad, but ultimately a level of stress that we can tolerate. And I think where it becomes bad is our response to that stress. Are we breaking down and finding it's not helping us? Or 2, how long is that maintained for?
So there's something I want you to go back to, the Jeff Bezos quote or some facsimile of that. I often thought the same sort of thing, that some stress is the avoidance of something that we are responsible for. Or it's the doing something that we know we shouldn't be doing, which kind of goes back into the title of this podcast, right? The business of intuition, that if we are really paying attention to ourselves and how our body and our mind is showing up for us regarding the decisions we're making, we're going to get little warning signs that says this is something that I shouldn't probably do. But if we don't have that awareness, I might still decide to do it, only be stressed out because there's some part of my subconscious that says, we shouldn't be doing this. This is the wrong thing to do, but I'm doing it anyway. And I feel like that happens a lot with the executives we deal with, is that they've said yes to stuff that they know they shouldn't be doing, which is the reason why they feel the stress that they are. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think in the higher leadership or business space, we're in a constant battle with what needs to be refined, delegated, transferred, or refocused on ourselves, right? It's a constant battle of what is really taking up our time on our calendar. And I think if I reflect over where stress comes through in my day, it's usually the disruptive nature of there's 3 other things that need to be done in my day that I shouldn't be doing, or that shouldn't be on my list. When I'm busy in the level of effort I'm putting into something, I don't think that correlates to stress, because if it's in my genius zone, it's in my focus, I'm in my flow, then that's not stress. That's just getting shit done and really feeling like I'm in that zone to move forward. So I don't think stress correlates with how busy or difficult a task is. It simply comes down to other factors like, is this something that should be on my plate? Is this the best use of my time? Or as you mentioned, is this something I should be doing in the first place?
Exactly. And I think we approach stress reduction from a one-size-fits-all perspective. But to your point, everybody has a different threshold for what is stressful. And what I might consider to be really stressful, you might go, that's a walk in the park for me, man. I mean, what's the big deal? We all approach it differently. Have you read a book by, what was it, Tony Schwartz, The Power of Full Engagement?
I know the author. I haven't read the book.
I'll just quickly do a little quick shout out for you and for listeners that it goes right into this topic. So he did a study that was comparing the way in which the professional athletes in that industry manage performance, i.e. stress, and then way we manage performance in business. And of course, they're very, very different. In professional athletic industry, like I'm a baseball player or whatever, I'm going to throw 6 or 7 innings, but the next game I'm going to be out with, ice on my shoulder because somebody else is going to do that. So stress is a sort of a sacred god that they manage really well, and they know where the thresholds are and what the rituals are to be able to manage all that. But in business, we just keep plowing through, more and more and more and more and more. And if we applied the business mode of performance into professional athletics, we would have a lot more injuries and a lot less world, records being broken all the time just because they don't mix. And I just think that was a fascinating study on that. So what are your recommendations? I mean, where do we start? I mean, what's the first thing? I'm listening to you, and it makes a lot of sense. What are some things that you would recommend people begin to do to be able to get a handle on their burnout?
Yeah, this is where your title of your podcast in general, I think I really resonated with, because it really comes down to the intuitive first steps. I think every high-level professional usually has got to the level of success they have probably through some level of all or nothing attitude, right? There's a level of optimism, there's a level of action, there's a level of focus. I think the problem with something like a health pursuit, trying to improve your health, get stronger, get lean, that sort of thing, is it is literally in the world of weight training at least, is a continual pursuit of finding failure, right, over and over and over again, right? So typically, if you're in a split testing environment of an opt-in page or a certain component in the company, there's probably the same level of that split testing that comes through, but it's simply an observation of certain data to then transition to the next step. I think the problem is when we move to a health space, we don't take that as the logical split testing that we're doing to experience or work towards the best version of our plan. We tend to take it personally and we're not moving forward. So a couple of first steps that we look at, it very much ties into what we've just been talking about around stress, is if we started to apply some of the principles that we would approach a professional sporting scenario with to the business space, we'd have a much more higher functioning body, a lot more focus throughout the day, and much clearer blocks, because we'd be taking to-do lists to time blocks. We'd be getting very clear on what that looks like in our calendar and when those short spurts of effort or focus really are, rather than just a 10-hour blur of stuff, right? If we were creating times where there was actually a very intentional downtime, where instead of inhaling another meal between meetings or while we're still on a Zoom call or getting to the end of the day, and rather than actively recovering, we're doing some form of passive disengagement. We're watching TV, we're having the alcohol, we're doing something to block out the day at the expense of tomorrow, rather than something that's intentionally going to tune us in, be more intuitive with our body itself, and get ready for tomorrow. So to give you 3 quick action steps under that theme, I think the first one is do something to move, to breathe, to feel alive in the morning, right? For some people, that could simply be a 10-minute walk around the block. It does not need to be a 1-hour CrossFit session in the morning, but that's going to be dependent on who you are. Are you more of a morning person who you find your more intense workout's going to be in the morning, or is it just getting outside, getting some sunlight, getting some fresh air before the day starts? Some version of movement, not only from a very chemical or cellular level, your body is actually going to be functioning much better. You're going to produce better energy throughout the day and probably better focus as well. There's also a very real shift around, let's actually just focus on you before the day starts. And so many business owners and leaders, if they're not intentional around their morning, are straight onto the emails, straight onto social media, straight into everyone else's stuff before focusing on that. So it doesn't need to be 2 hours on a mountaintop doing your meditation. It could just simply be 5 deep breaths on the end of your bed. Check in with you and actually understand how you're feeling. If there's some stiffness, some tightness, you're feeling run down, that's an area of personal inventory that allows you to set up your day a little bit better. And if you're applying it as the athlete, as opposed to the chronic burnt out business owner, you'll start to look at that day a little bit differently. Those small pockets in your day, rather than looking for the perfect 2 hours to get a workout in, look for 10 minutes. Where are those little pockets of opportunity to go for a quick walk outside, be able to peel your face away from a screen so you can actually have a meal instead of feeling like you're trying to do 3 things at once. So I think that intentional focus around movement first in the morning, breathing or bringing awareness to your meals, and actually in a very real way improving your digestion. And we can dive into that a little bit more if you like. And then the last one, I think, is just that time blocking nature, getting it from a to-do list and blocking it into your day. Something I see a lot with business owners or these high-level managers is we're running 3 or 4 different departments or 3 or 4 different companies, and we've got 3 or 4 different calendars, right? We wonder why we can't get it all done in a day, let alone remember to pick up the kids or get a workout in or a morning walk or whatever that other task is. It's actually getting that into one spot, because we're very good at creating a whole bunch of ideas. We're not so good at blocking that into a day and actually bringing an assessment to how long each one of those tasks are going to take.
There's so much, again, you said that, just fascinating. And I totally agree with the idea that we go back to that we sometimes do things that we know we shouldn't be doing, or we sometimes don't do things that we know we should be. And that stress is a downstream effect of that lack of alignment of what we know is true and what we should be doing. If you add on top of that, this idea that we get into these habits, like what you said, you wake up in the morning, first thing you do is you pull out your phone and you check your emails even before you even put on your clothes, right? I think that, and I'm sure there's data to support this, that this type of activity that constantly is becoming part of our lives has a chemical reaction within our brains, much like we would when we are drinking coffee or when we are using drugs or alcohol, what have you, that I think it was probably Stephen Covey coined the phrase about urgency addiction, that we get addicted, not just from a metaphoric perspective, but literally the biology of addiction is being used in this environment to keep this mechanism of constantly working beyond our capacity. So we almost have two different areas where we're sort of screwed. I mean, one hand, we have the habit of doing something, which is hard to break a habit, right? Because you got to really intentionally go beyond the subconscious, which is running the show. But then you have this other layer of the cake, which is saying, well, now you're getting some chemical reactions from your brain to do the same thing over and over again, even though it's not good for you. So you have a chemical and emotional addiction to this non-productive, burnout creating activity. And I just wonder, what's your thoughts? Am I barking up the right tree?
100%. I hadn't heard that phrase before. I love it. The urgency addiction, in a very real way, is something we see all of the time. And I think it's something that I lived with for a very long time myself, and realized that I got to a point that it was nearly easier to continue working all night than actually stop and put myself first. And I think that's a space that many of us get in, is the list gets so long that we just keep pushing us further and further out, until I get to the point that, you start to realize that your hair's falling out, you're chronically tired, you're not sleeping, you're short with your partner. Everything starts to really snowball from there, because you're just finding it easier to really ultimately be addicted to that urgency of the next thing, that all of the stuff that needs to be done. And there's two bits I want to highlight there. First part is what we call the pregnenolone steal, which is in a very real way, a chemical reaction that's happening behind this urgency addiction, right? Which is our body is literally producing cortisol, our main stress hormone, instead of producing our main sex hormones like testosterone. And if we're noticing that that's happening, our body is constantly pushing towards dopamine as our main driver for the day. That, in a very real way, that dopamine addictive response to urgency, as opposed to actually functioning and recovering on a high level. So if we run on this high level of focus throughout the day, and we're just breaking our body down through the process. Now, that the second part to that, and something we dive into a ton, is getting an awareness of this arousal state of our central nervous system. If we're always in that constant urgent and dopamine-filled response, we're constantly in a fight or flight stressed response. Now, what that does in a very physical way is pulls a lot of that blood towards our limbs, our legs and arms in that fight or flight. It's a very evolutionary or adaptive response to a stress, right? Now, if we're doing that and we're trying to sit down for lunch and we're trying to eat some food or just kind of fuel the day, if we're not able to adjust that response from that chronic stress or heightened feeling that we have all day, we're not digesting food well. We're going to notice we're gassy, we're bloated, we're sluggish, we've got the energy afternoon dip. We're looking for another coffee because it's another way to get that dopamine back up. It's a constant seeking of, very much in a very real way, that urgency addiction that you're talking about. And hopefully that explains sort of what's happening from a cellular level behind it all, but it's definitely something that's reinforced in the business space.
So what you're also saying, Olly, is that there is this relationship between the mind and attitude and the physical body, that we've heard this before, but I just wanted to call it out, that the body is a warning signal and an information source of how we are feeling emotionally and so forth, and that they are not separate, but they're very much aligned. I was talking to somebody recently who had, I guess, broken their leg again for the second time. And so we were talking about it, and I was trying to unpack with him what was going on. In a sense, like, what is your leg trying to tell you? That if your leg had a mouth and it was giving you a message, what was that message? And so he had to think about that. And it was probably things around direction. Wasn't feeling like he was heading in the right direction, because legs are sort of the source of our movement moving forward, right? There was something about, I'm not feeling sure-footed, meaning in the world in which he was at. So he was able to make that sort of connection. And it took a little bit of self-awareness on his part to make that connection. And I also wondered about myself, like, okay, if I get sick, which I don't normally get sick, I'm very blessed that way. But if I do, the first thing I think of, like, okay, what happened here? Okay, yes, and maybe I came into contact with somebody who had something. That's obviously true, but Is there something in my illness that is teaching me that I need to learn something about how I'm managing my life, my attitude, my body, my stress, and so forth? And I can usually find something. I guess I'm wondering, do you get to that level of sort of unpacking for people what's going on with their stress and how it's showing up in their body and how their body is giving them some information back?
Yeah. What we call it is the tick, the whack, and the truck. Now, the tickle, the whack, and the truck. And it's 3 levels of awareness or lack thereof that we all seem to go through when we start to realize that we're heading in the wrong direction, or we should probably start to change something. The tickle is that moment where you tweak your lower back, or you're like, oh, I haven't really moved enough in the last week and my body's letting me know, right? Get off your bum, let's get a little bit more movement in. The second one, if we still don't listen, is we get the whack, right? That's the doctor's visit. That's the, hey, you need to lose some weight, or you're going to be on a cholesterol medication, or whatever else is coming through, right? That's the, right, I need to change something. Now, if that doesn't happen, then we get to the full-blown truck. And that's the moment where we're like, shit, how do we not see this 6 months ago? All right, I've just had my mate have a heart attack, or I've just noticed that I've had I've got really sick and it's knocked me out for a couple of weeks, or whatever else is coming through, right? It really knocks you off your feet, and it just gets louder and louder and louder until you finally listen. And typically that's somewhere in your mid 40s and 50s when you're burning the candles at both ends. You're still trying to keep the mind going, but you're not looking after the body. And if you're not doing that in your mid 40s and 50s, you're not in a place where it's bouncing back as quickly as it was before. You're not sleeping as well. You're feeling a lot more run down. When your mind says yes, your body is just a little bit more hesitant. And I think that's a space where many men especially start to really disconnect mind to body, and they try not to listen. And that's where the acid reflux medications comes through to block out the heartburn. They're starting to take the painkillers because they're feeling the lower back. The depression medication comes through when actually their testosterone is screamingly low, right? We're looking at all these disconnects coming through to just survive in the modern world, as opposed to that intuition of understanding what's actually going on and how to rebuild, recover, and bounce back for the next day.
Understood. So tell me, you've got a 3-part model. Tell us about the model.
Yeah. For us, the goal that we've seen come through, or the problem I think that's coming through, especially in the modern world, is we're getting all this information coming through. It's an area where we're exposed to more information than we've ever have. But a hard part of that, as we all know, is sifting through the 99% to find the 1% that's actually accurate information, right? That's hard enough to do. The second part to that is, well, there's a big difference between what's accurate for 20-year-old getting ready for a athletics competition versus us at 45, 50. So we need to take what's accurate to what's actually relevant, right? And that's a huge part of moving through to that next model. So the reason I bring that up is we all have these little pockets of information of little bits that we've heard or we've learned or that we're trying, but I'm finding that very few people are integrating these together, right? The goal at the end of the day is we're looking at nutrition, we're looking at movement, we're looking at lifestyle. But if we can understand that full model, the goal is ultimately probably some level of longevity or lifelong health. We're looking at making sure our energy is actually lasting all day rather than the dips and dives the whole way through. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we've got a body we're proud of or that's actually functioning throughout the day. So the goal for me with this 3-step model was trying to make sure that it's really an integration of those 3. We're taking into account physical, digestive, and psychological health. Because if we're in a spot where, our whole discussion today has been around, if we're focusing on nailing the training and we're getting our boot camp classes in, or we've joined a CrossFit class, whatever else, but we're not taking into account how stressed and heightened we are throughout the day, we're just adding stress on top of stress. Now we're just breaking our body down. Right. So looking at integrating those 3 just allows us to know that nutrition isn't in a good spot unless we've got some form of routine or some version of mindfulness, of intuition around how our body's functioning around meals. Our training is never going to be at its best unless we're fueling that workout. We're recovering, we're bouncing back. So that's the whole, I can dive into that as much as you like, but that's the premise or the idea around the integration of these 3 is if you're just focusing on 1 or 2 with these little pockets of information rather than all of them together, it makes a significant difference.
And you really sort of focused on those who are beyond the age of 40. Is that your sweet spot? Not necessarily a young 20-year-old who's, okay.
100%. Because what's happening is if you're in your mid-20s, you can, stop a couple of beers and a couple of pies and go for a run or 2 and you'll be back. Your body starts shifting pretty quickly. If you're in your mid-40s, 50s, things don't bounce back that quickly. And I think looking at it through the lens of most people trying to get their health back on track that are seeing things not respond like they used to, even if they are putting the effort in that, right? They're watching what they eat, they're trying to get a couple workouts in, but they're noticing that belly grow. there's a lot of unanswered question around what's actually happening at a deeper level that need to be addressed first. And we go through what is more of a 5-step model of looking at stress, toxicity, sleep first before the training and nutrition even comes into the picture, or at least the main focus, because there's a health foundation, there's a rebuilding of getting your body back on your side that becomes so much more important that maybe didn't need to be addressed at the same level when you were 20.
Perfect. Well, Olly, how can people connect to you? I know that you got a podcast. Talk a little bit about that, and then maybe some of the programs that you're offering.
Yeah, totally. If you want to dive deeper into this is very much a personal health conversation around how to understand what's going on with your body, how to actually build out a custom plan based on all of the things that you're likely taking into account in your day. The big one here is if you are just finding that you've got these little pockets of information, you're not sure why your body's not responding, you don't know where to start, that would be where we tend to come in and actually start to, we dive into your blood work, we start to look at how it's actually going to integrate into your lifestyle. If you're traveling or you're eating around, family and friends, you're probably not going to see this be sustainable if you're having your chicken and broccoli for dinner, right? Like, how do you actually integrate this in? You feel like you're burning body fat, your energy is high, and you feel like it's actually working in your day-to-day life. That's certainly where we start to come in. And you can certainly check us out at bodyreset.online. That's our main website. Or you can search for us on any major podcast platform for Body Reset again, and really just dive a little bit deeper into all the areas of toxicity, gut health, lowering inflammation in the body, getting your body back. If you're noticing stress is getting on top of you a little bit more, there's this big awareness of, well, let's increase our threshold, and what are some variables I can take into consideration there. So hopefully, if you can find me there under Body Reset, that would be the best place.
And again, you provide also some individual coaching for people around this 3-part model, this body reset process you're talking about?
Yeah. So the whole goal for us is, as I mentioned, it's looking at this as an integration of mind, body, and digestive. And if we look at that through that lens, we're not just playing the calorie counting game and getting more workouts in. It is very much a process of, it's not what you eat, it's what you absorb that matters. So let's rebuild that gut. There's usually 10, 15, 30 years of damage that we're needing to rebuild and allow your body to tolerate that outside world so much better. So we start there, we start to really work with the body that's working with you. And if you're noticing you're not getting the results from the sweat equity you're getting in currently, that's where we dive in.
Very good. Well, Olly, thank you so much for your time and your insights. It's been very useful.
No problem, Dean. I've really enjoyed it, and thanks for the questions.
You bet.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.